How does Medicaid planning work, and what do you need to be aware of? By the end of this video, you will gain clarity for your personal retirement plan and have access to action items to secure your retirement.
To learn more about securing your retirement and all the different elements you need to know, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified when we post a video every Monday. We have helped hundreds of our clients gain clarity and get on the path to a comfortable and happy retirement. Now it's your turn. Let's dive in.
Welcome, everyone, to our podcast today. We certainly are excited about what we're going to be able to go over. Merce and I, when we're talking to individuals, we get the question quite regularly, how do we deal with certain types of estate planning? And one of those is, hey, I've heard about this thing where you can plan for Medicaid or long-term care or nursing home. And there's a lot of misconceptions around this idea. I think a lot of it, people sometimes think, oh my goodness, my house can get taken, and and they misunderstand how the actual parts of Medicaid work and the difference between that and Medicare. And so we have Kevin Houston, who's an attorney, an estate planning attorney. He deals in this topic. And so Kevin, thank you so much for coming on the show today and talking with us.
Well, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Great. So let's just kind of get into it here right off the top here, Kevin. Could you tell us, what is Medicaid and how does that come into play and who is that for?
Yeah, so Medicaid is essentially, a government program. It's essentially insurance for people who need assistance with paying for medical care, paying for long-term care. And so it's designed for individuals who meet certain criteria. There are limited, you've got to have limited means. In other words, there's income criteria and asset criteria that you have to meet. And you must be 65 years or older or disabled to qualify.
Gotcha. So when you say that, when I hear 65 and older, I immediately, Kevin, I think of Medicare. So tell me what the difference between Medicare is and Medicaid. I know you just said income limitations, but tell me just from a grand scheme of things, what's the major differences there?
Yeah, I think there's two important distinctions to keep in mind between Medicaid and Medicare. One is who is eligible for it. So Medicare is not a means-tested program, meaning that if you're 65 or older, you can get Medicare. For Medicaid, you do have to be, like I said, it's either 65 years or older or disabled. And then you have to meet certain asset and income criteria. So in other words, there are asset limits and there's also income caps. So you've got to be under a certain income level and asset level, depending on which Medicaid program you're trying to qualify for. So Medicaid can be tricky to qualify for. It's great if you can get it though, in terms of the benefits. The other important distinction would be what it actually covers. And people get confused as to what Medicare covers and what Medicaid covers, of course. And what I often tell people is Medicare does very little in terms of long-term care. So in other words, if you end up in a facility, whether it's assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care facility, Medicaid is the resource to look to for that. Medicare is not going to cover much. Basically, with Medicare, you can get 20 days full coverage potentially, maybe 100 days partial coverage, or the days 21 through 100 partial coverage for a rehab center, for example. But Medicare is not going to cover long-term care, and that's why Medicaid is such an important benefit. Because if you are in a Medicaid, a nursing home, a long-term care facility, Medicare will run out very shortly, and then you've got to look to Medicaid potentially to pay for your bill.
So, a lot of times when people start looking into it or they start thinking about it, they're concerned about, I guess, in all essence, trying to protect their assets. So could we talk a little bit about what I guess gets thrown around sometimes as Medicaid planning? Like,
Right.
How does that work? I mean, what is a person trying to achieve in that idea of Medicaid planning?
Sure. So looking ahead, we see what the asset limits are, and for Medicaid, you've got strict asset limits. Like, for example, if you're single, you've got a $2,000 asset limit for what they call countable assets. Now, there are certain assets that are not countable, like a house, a car, certain things, but most of your assets would be countable. And so then people try to plan in terms of trying to figure out how can I qualify for Medicaid paying for my long-term care benefits, and yet try to preserve some of these assets. And so it really is a means of trying to protect assets, either in advance of the need, or you can do a crisis mode strategy, and we can discuss both of those. But Medicaid planning is most effectively done if you plan ahead of time. And that's because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with, or maybe not, but the 5-year look back. That's a term that gets thrown around a lot. So when you apply for Medicaid, for long-term care Medicaid, they ask, have you given away any assets in the last 5 years? And if you have given away assets 5 years prior to the application for Medicaid, you'll be penalized for, and not be eligible for Medicaid for a period of time. And that period is based on how much you gave away, in fact. So the key there, one area of concern, or one strategy would be go ahead and gift assets in advance of the need for Medicaid. And if you can do it 5 years in advance, then after 5 years, those gifts or those transfers are off the books for Medicaid. And so a lot of the pre-planning strategies would be transferring assets to try to get past the 5-year look back for skilled nursing Medicaid.
Gotcha. So Medicaid planning is it's good to be thinking about it well ahead of the time that you're going to be needing that long-term care or skilled care situation, because of that 5-year look back period. And a lot of our listeners know about Medicare and their look back period from an income perspective and what that could do to your Medicare premiums. And then life insurance has look back periods too, as to whether or not you qualify. And if I believe there's a 2-year look back period on some of the things that you say when you apply for life insurance. So it makes sense, because of the value that Medicaid can bring to the table. They are going to do the government is going to do their due diligence and make sure you actually do qualify. So you kind of gave us the best time if you're going to do the pre-planning, but you did mention something which is called crisis planning.
Yeah.
And now I'm wondering, you said a 5-year look back period, but a crisis, you don't know if crisis is going to happen within a 5-year window. It happens that day or it happens in that year. So what do you do there in that situation?
Yeah, so crisis planning, again, is much trickier, and there's no guarantee at all that you're going to get in a crisis situation and still be able to protect your assets, because Medicaid is always changing the rules, and they tend to be more restrictive, of course. So in other words, some planning strategies that might work now may not work in a year in terms of these crisis strategies. But I'll give you some examples. Under the Medicaid rules, you can transfer assets to a disabled child without any penalty. So I've had many clients who have taken advantage of that, and they can transfer a house or transfer really whatever resources they have to a disabled child, or to a trust for a disabled person is also allowed. If you're under the age of 65, you can set up a first-party special needs trust, and that would be exempt from Medicaid as well. You can transfer assets to your spouse as well, and that's without penalty for Medicaid. Now it gets tricky because, if you are married, they're counting the assets of both husband and wife. So it's a little bit more, complicated than that. But, the point is there are some crisis strategies available. Also, crisis planning, really involves trying to shelter assets by converting these countable assets to non-countable assets. And just a quick example of that, like I mentioned before, that a house is non-countable for Medicaid, meaning that you can own a house and qualify for Medicaid. Well, what that means is you can actually, pay down your mortgage, for example, or put some money into renovating your house. And that would be a way of spending down your cash to within the Medicaid asset limits. And you're building equity in your house, of course, but that house again is exempt from Medicaid. So there's quite a number of crisis strategies if you know what to look for when you're planning for Medicaid.
So what you just said there, just so I understand, let's say you've got 100,000 in the bank sitting in cash, and you owe 100,000 on your mortgage. Well, in that situation right there, you would technically not qualify because you have a certain amount of cash sitting there. But you're saying, hey, if we take that 100,000, put it into the house, and now, because that is now all in what you call non-countable asset, that opens up an avenue for Medicaid planning. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, converting countable assets to non-countable. That's exactly right. So that 100,000 is now vaporized, if you will. It's in the house in a non-countable form. If you're married too, there's also some good strategies under current law where you can set up what's called Medicaid compliant annuities or Medicaid compliant promissory notes. And why don't I go through an example of that as well? So let's say you've got 100,000, and so now if you're single, I mentioned that it's a $2,000 asset limit for Medicaid. If you're married and you're trying to qualify for Medicaid, generally speaking, what they'll do is they'll take the combined assets of husband and wife, and they don't really care whose name it's in. If the husband's in the nursing home, they'll count the assets of the wife as well, and the husband. But so let's say the husband's in the nursing home. If they've got 100,000 in cash, the Medicaid would say they've got to spend down roughly half of that before he can qualify for Medicaid. So basically, the wife can keep $50,000. He's got to reduce his $50,000 down to $2,000. So you got to spend down basically $48,000 out of the $100,000. So what he can do in that situation is he can transfer his assets all to his wife, and she can put the $48,000 that has to be spent down into an annuity. It's a special type of annuity that's going to pay her income over a period of time. And because it's Medicaid compliant, that means that that annuity is not countable for Medicaid. And that would allow him to immediately become eligible, even though that asset wasn't spent for nursing care. It's just been converted to an income stream for his wife. So again, there's many strategies like that I could share, but of course, just kind of giving you the overview. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So when it comes to that, because I know you do other things other than just Medicaid planning, but if we were to look at this and say, who should be doing this? Like what's the scenario where that somebody would say, hey, I need to go and maybe start looking at Medicaid planning? Is that something everybody should do? Or is it really kind of more of a specialized type scenario?
I would say everyone should start thinking about it. I would say just about everyone should have a will and some basic legal documents like your will, your financial power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and probably a living will. And those power of attorney documents, just having those can set up a situation where they would authorize the person you're naming, your agent, to be able to do some of these Medicaid planning strategies. So if you do nothing else, even when you're younger, just getting your basic legal documents in place, which everybody should have, that power of attorney can authorize things like these gifting strategies or establishing trusts and other things that can be used later for Medicaid planning. I mean, I've had people as young as I'd say 30s or 40s who have a tragic accident and end up needing to qualify for Medicaid. So you really never know when these strategies might be helpful. But for the most part, I mean, people kind of probably start thinking seriously about Medicaid planning when they're probably in their 60s and 70s, thinking more about passing on assets to the children. But I would say, pretty much you're never too young to think about this. Ordinarily, when people think seriously about gifting assets and transferring assets for Medicaid, like the 5-year look back to transfer assets for that, usually for my clients, it's probably in their 60s, 70s, even in their 80s. Some people are doing that to try to shelter assets. Maybe even 90s. I mean, I've had people in their 90s even thinking, hey, I might be around for another 5, 10, 15 years, and they still want to shelter their assets, which I support. These are legal strategies. These are all completely above board. All these Medicaid strategies we run by the Medicaid caseworker, and it's perfectly within the rules and perfectly ethical.
Yeah. And so on that point, we do like to try to stay balanced here. And so everything that we've said is kind of in the pro of, you should be thinking at least towards Medicaid planning. And there's obviously a lot of advantages if you can get qualified for Medicaid, because it takes care of a lot of the expenses that, what are you going to do otherwise? You're going to pay for it yourself if you have the assets. So if there's a way to shelter those assets, it makes sense. But what are some of the cons here? It can't just be all great. There's got to be something where the negatives or the gotchas that we got to be thinking about. The first one that comes to mind is, well, you no longer have assets to a degree. You've kind of transferred that away from yourselves, right?
Yeah, yeah. So for one thing, I will say this. I do want to underscore one point, and before I address that, the cost of long-term care is become extremely expensive. And I don't
Oh yeah.
know, if you've kept up with this, but I've seen, especially in COVID days, now that COVID has hit, the prices have just skyrocketed in long-term care facilities. And I have seen $20,000 a month bills coming from a skilled nursing facility. I mean, that's unusual, right? But it's not uncommon in this area, and let's say in Raleigh, to see $10,000, $12,000, $14,000 a month, long-term care bills. But yeah, but okay, but to your point, so that's the importance, is we're trying to shelter assets, because assets can be quickly reduced if you end up in a nursing home, or even in a memory care facility, or assisted living for that matter. But yeah, to your point, in terms of Medicaid strategies, yeah, if you're thinking about pre-planning and trying to shelter assets and basically gift assets ahead of the 5-year look back, yeah, I mean, the downside clearly is you're giving up control of your assets. And so, for example, if you were to make a gift to your children for the purpose of trying to protect those assets from Medicaid, if you think you may need those assets back, that's purely going to be in the discretion of your children as to whether they later support you, right? You are giving up control of the assets. And I never take that lightly. Yeah, when I talk with clients, I always say, they like to ask me, well, what should I do, right? Well, the answer is, I can't tell you that. You've got to weigh the pros and the cons here, because yes, if you give away assets, you're sheltering them from Medicaid, but clearly the downside is you're giving up control of your assets, and now you're subject to the discretion of your children, let's say, as to whether they want to support you or not. That's the downside, clearly.
So how does your process work if somebody is got questions about this, or they're thinking about what should they do? Like how does that work with you in your practice?
Well, we like to talk things through and get a good understanding of what the client's assets are, what their concerns are, and we do. And this is not a plug. We just personally do free consultations to kind of weigh that out and make sure it's a good fit. But yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of different goals that come into play with estate planning. There's things like estate taxes, there's things like Medicaid, there's things like avoiding probate, there's incapacity issues and making sure that if you become incapacitated, you've got legal documents to address that. So it's kind of a holistic approach that we don't necessarily focus on Medicaid or the elder law component, but it's one of many factors that we look at in terms of a good holistic estate plan. And some people, of course, in their younger stages are going to have very little concern with Medicaid, right? And they're more concerned about making sure that there's, guardianship and trust in place for their minor children or whatnot. So I don't know if I answered your question, but feel free to follow up on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So what I hear there is that, yeah, you do the elder care and the Medicaid planning, but you're pretty much holistically looking at the entire situation, and that helps you see whether or not you do need to go down that path of Medicaid planning or not. And so I think that's great. So, I think we've had a wealth of knowledge here. Medicaid, Medicare, they're very heavy topics, and we could talk forever on them and ultimately start to lose where we are. But I think this has been great. Kevin, if you could just tell us or tell our listeners how, if they found some value here, if they wanted to reach out to you, how could they do that?
Sure. You can call us directly. Our direct number, 919-741-6565. You can look us up. We've got two websites. I'll give you one of two websites, HoustonLawFirm.com. It's HUSTON, HoustonLawFirm.com. People like to misspell my name, of course, but yeah.
Great. Well, Kevin, we certainly do appreciate you talking to us today and explaining what is a complicated topic. So thank you so much for coming on, and we'll probably have to have you back here to do some follow-up in a future episode. So thank you, though.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to join you again. Appreciate it.
We hope this video has given you some confidence and clarity as you plan for a worry-free life in retirement. But what else do you need? We have created a complimentary video course called 3 Keys to Secure Your Retirement. This video walks you through step by step what you need to do to get ready for retirement. You can also check out our podcast called Secure Your Retirement. You can subscribe below.
For more retirement tips, watch this video. Create your retirement income plan. Also, click here to subscribe to our podcast, Secure Your Retirement. If you like this video, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe and share it with your friends.